Hello there, my name is Benedetta and welcome to Tender is the Read. I hope you've been well. I've been very busy lately. I've had a really intense month of June with a lot of traveling for work. It's been super enjoyable nevertheless, but a lot of time away from home. And then now in July, I am working through a move through basically 3 countries. So it's been a little bit chaotic. But today I'm actually here to recap my reading from the month of June, which has actually been great because I've had, as I said, a lot of time traveling, and when I'm on the train or on the plane, what I enjoy doing is reading just to pass the time. And when you're contained in an aircraft for 2 to 3 hours, there's really nothing else you can do but read. So from that point of view, it's been amazing, and I have 11 books to show you today. I actually took this month as an opportunity to discover new genres, new authors, and sort of continue the trend that I think you might have seen from my May recap as well, where I explore more contemporary writing, but also some cult classics, I would call them, from the 70s. So it's been super exciting, and yeah, I can't wait to show you. Before we start, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so that I know that you enjoy the content. Without further ado, let's get into it. So I want to start here with a classic, a modern classic I would call it. I read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse this month. It was my buddy read. This book is spiritual journey following this man called Siddhartha who lives at the time of the Gautama Buddha, and he seeks to discover the meaning of life and make the most out of his existence following various teachings from Buddhism, describing the steps that it takes for him to discover himself. This book is narrated very simply, like it's almost a fairy tale. It lets you make your conclusions about spirituality. It is so lyrical in its prose. I'm sure it can be inspiring to many, but at the same time I feel like I'm never in a position to really enjoy these books because I'm never in the mood for self-discovery. I mean, I read it at an airport and it was really busy, and obviously I concentrated, like I got into it and I understood what it was trying to do. It's just I'm never in that mood these days. Nevertheless, it's very short, very well written, and ultimately I gave it 3 stars. So next up, I read one of Shakespeare's comedies, in particular All's Well That Ends Well. So technically not a comedy, but a problem play in the sense that it's neither a comedy nor a tragedy. It's got some elements of both, and it's about the story of this woman, Helen, who cures the king of France, I believe, and she's granted one wish, and she asks for the hand of a man far above her station in marriage. The problem is that this man essentially hates the idea of marrying her and repudiates her, and so she sort of tricks her way into actually being loved by him eventually. And it's really weird in that sense because you don't really know who to root for in this play, since obviously we want a good resolution for our heroine, but at the same time it's not like this is an epic love story or anything. It's bizarre in that sense, but nevertheless it's a good play. I gave it 3 stars because ultimately I don't think that it's as funny as some of the comedies and as deep as some of the tragedies. It's very much an in-between. If you're like me and you're somebody trying to make their way through the folio, it's completely harmless. It's in no way actively offensive. It was alright. I mean, 3 stars is kind of satisfactorily good, but nothing to write home about. As you may have guessed, the main reason for me to read this comedy just now was that I wanted to read Mona Awad's All's Well. This book centers around a college theatre director teacher who wants to stage All's Well for the year's Shakespeare play. Therefore, the play is very much at the center of the plot, as well as there are a lot of parallels to the plot itself and the characters. So I felt like it was sort of mandatory reading before reading this one, although clearly that's just because I enjoy Shakespeare as well. So I thought I would benefit from this connection, but just for clarity, you do not have to have read the play to understand or enjoy this book. So this novel is quite interesting because it centers around the concept concept of chronic pain, medical misogyny, and a lot of trials and tribulation that people with that type of issue have to go through, with not being believed by people around them, not being able to convey what the pain is all about. To me, it was very interesting, although it's not something that I experienced, fortunately. As usual, it had Mona Awad's signature style of magical realism, surreal plot, and unhinged characters. I loved it. I absolutely adored it. It was super entertaining. The writing is so funny and witty, and because of all the absurd things that happen, it keeps you guessing. You have no idea what the direction of the story is. It was quite reminiscent of Bunny, also by Mona Awad, which I enjoyed as well, but this one was much better in the sense that the plot was a lot more definite. There was the end goal of staging the play. There were more characters around it that sort of in a way grounded the story. It was super fun, and for that reason I gave it 4.5 stars. The next book is my first foray into literature from the 70s, which is something that I've done quite a bit this month, and the very first was Sex and Rage by Eve Babbitt. I feel like this author has been having a bit of a renaissance recently, especially her short stories collection Black Swans is everywhere on the internet, but I decided to start with this one because the title is really catchy, right? And also it's a novel. Sex and Rage has a lot of autobiographical elements, and because of the fact that Eve Babbitt led such an interesting life in the center of the Los Angeles cultural zeitgeist in the 60s and 70s, of course all of those elements featured in the book make it so entertaining to me. It follows the story of this protagonist called Jacaranda, who is, you know, a bit of a hippie really. She leads this bohemian lifestyle, going from surfing all day to partying all night, being part of the rock and roll scene, and in the meantime she tries to be a writer. That is obviously her calling. She is extremely talented but not particularly driven, and also suffers from alcoholism and failed friendships and relationships all around, and this like crippling sense of sort of imposter syndrome, I would call it these days, and anxiety about her being an author. It's quite cerebral in a way while being super entertaining because, as I said, themes I find extremely captivating personally. It's not as glamorous as it could be. It very much unearths the dirt and uneasiness that people in this type of environment would have back in the day. It was compelling, especially later in the part in which she does go to New York, find that people do appreciate her as an author. It's quite interesting in that sense. I really truly enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars because it was a bit of a grower personally, and I look forward to reading more from Eve Babbitt. Speaking of LA and the cultural zeitgeist of the 70s, next up I read the original bestseller Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Cezanne. So this book I know has a bit of a murky reputation because of the fact that it's considered not particularly well written as much as it was extremely commercially successful, and also a bit of a camp piece of media, especially when related to the movie. I absolutely love this book. I don't care that it's camp, I don't care that it's trash literature, I don't care about that at all. I read it and I devoured it because it was such an entertaining story. So this focuses around 3 women, well, girls at the beginning. It follows them for 20 years as they sort of try to make it in showbiz. They all have different perspectives, different takes on it. One is more of a TV personality, one is more of a standard Hollywood star, and the other one does more odd foreign film projects and stuff. So at the time this was very much inspired by starlets of the time. One of them is meant to be Judy Garland. I think that would be the most recognizable name today, and I'm glad that their sort of shadow on these characters is faded now because we don't have as much name recognition for those people anymore. So I could enjoy this as just a piece of fiction, which it is objectively, and it is quite wild, all the things that happen. As I said, it's a long narrative that takes place over 20 to 25 years, and it's all about the up and downs of being in showbiz because the dolls of the title are actually the pills that these women take. It's all about how there is no other way but to fall into addiction once you are into this sort of show business and you're dealing with fame and whatnot. Particularly, these pills are basically uppers and downers, so barbiturates and amphetamines to basically wake up the morning after. It's a very scary look into Hollywood in the golden age. Everything that women were put through in order to succeed and achieve fame. I also didn't dislike the writing. I mean, yeah, it's a bit melodramatic, sure, it's camp, but I like that every once in a while. It's a 5 stars. I'm sorry. It might be one of my top favorite books of all time. I feel so bad saying it because critics hated it, but I don't know, I think it has merits in terms of entertainment at least. So that's my rating. So the next entry is Otessa Moshfegh's latest book, Labona. This novel is some weird tale set in this pseudo-medieval little village where all of the inhabitants are super ignorant and most of them live in poverty while the overlord hoards the resources and lives in this like squalid luxury. With this setting, we have sort of a cautionary tale, I guess, about religious fanaticism, bigotry, hypocrisy, really. Just a really bizarre tale. There are some elements that are fantastical as well, sort of like magical realism adjacent, and it is a choral story where the village, which is called Labona, is very much at the center. It does have a plot, but it almost doesn't even matter because there are no real consequences, no character is fighting towards any objective. It's just sometimes absurd for the sake of being absurd and also disgusting. It engages in a lot of that. You might have heard. I sort of get it. I didn't hate the experience of reading it, but I found it extremely unnecessary and it definitely doesn't cater to my personal taste. It's a bit of a shame because I did absolutely adore My Year of Rest and Relaxation and this has nothing to do with it. Couldn't be further away from it. The writing style itself, the story, the settings, I mean, it's just, it might as well be a completely different author. But because it's simply not my cup of tea, I ended up giving it 2 stars. Another sort of dark summer book that I read is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This is quite a short novel and it's all about these 2 sisters who live in isolation from their little town or village and their lives are shrouded in mystery. The village is distrustful and really hateful towards them. So this is all narrated through the eyes of the younger sister who is 18 and she's quite unhinged. Like sometimes she does sound like a much younger child, but also she says things that are quite out there at times, and this very much speaks to the masterful penmanship of Shirley Jackson. I had previously read The Lottery by her, which is a much shorter story, and this book sort of has the same eerie beginning where you have no idea what's happening, and in fact I would highly recommend going in it blind. I had this build up of suspense, and when you do sort of untangle the whole story, it is extremely satisfactory. I think it's perfect for spooky season or if you want something a little bit unsettling this summer. So I give this 3.5 stars. So the next book I have is a new release and I'm talking about OK Days by Jenny Mustard. First of all, I absolutely love the cover. This is a proof copy. Right now it's obviously out in hardback and I actually really enjoyed this. It's a story of this couple that sort of starts a bit of a summer fling knowing that it's gonna end because the girl Sam is moving back to her native country of Sweden in a matter of weeks, and it sort of explores their relationship as they realize how much they like each other. But there's also this constant question as to whether they can be together, like actually physically, due to the distance and what they are willing to sacrifice in order to make things work. I just really enjoyed the dynamics. It just felt really real, especially from my perspective. It probably hit a little bit too close to home, so I could relate to this struggle, but at the same time I also thought there were other elements that can be relatable for anybody. First of all, the just work environment they both are in, just the constant hustle, and most importantly the setting of London as this really huge presence. I really enjoyed the descriptions of all the different boroughs, all the different places they go to. It's quite sweet. I've described it as a love letter to London and I stand by it, and it does so beautifully. So I personally really appreciated this and I gave it 4.5 stars. Going back to the 70s, next up I read Play As It Lays by Joan Didion. So this was my first Joan Didion. About time, right? Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. This is a novel and it centers around a Hollywood actress, the wife of a director, who obviously struggles with addiction, once again to pill. Those seem to be very popular at the time, and especially barbiturates is what we're talking about. It just follows this woman as she sort of tries to navigate the difficulty of her life, exposed to sort of the jet set, the distance from her husband, from her daughter, and just the different pools of life when she actually has no will to do anything with it. She is just in this sort of like depressive state. It's really interesting the way it's written. It took me a second, I will say, to get into it because this character is deeply troubled. It's written in a way that is kind of hard to get to know her. We see how all the other characters are trying to reach out to her and they can't succeed, but eventually we understand her point of view and it makes sense. It's absolutely compelling. It's an interesting book exploring a lot of themes about being a woman at a time in which a lot of women's rights were denied, especially reproductive rights, and one of the great examples of the LA cultural renaissance of the time. Also super funny, just nothing to do with it, but in this photo actually is clearly not Joan Didion, whose face I think is quite recognizable. This lady here is Eve Babbitt's. I thought that was funny and I gave this one 3.5 stars. So the next one is actually more of a short story than a book, but you know, because it's published like this, I will count it, and it is Galatea by Madeline Miller. I love Madeline Miller. You will have heard me rave about her on my channel, but unfortunately what she did with this little story was something completely different from what she's done in the past and just didn't like it as much. So this is about the myth of Galatea and Pygmalion. Galatea in the myth is a statue that gets brought to life by Aphrodite, I believe, because her creator sculpture is extremely in love with her, and you know, there is some questionable consent issues right there. What Madeline Miller does is sort of take those more eerie elements to the myth and rework them in a way which is a feminist retelling, and that's not what's the issue with it. I just personally didn't like that the setting is sort of meant to be modern but in a non-descriptive era and place. So I don't know, it's just I don't really love Greek stories set outside of the Greek world, and for that reason, you know, I just couldn't get into this. I don't know, I didn't like it. I gave it 2 stars. And last but not least, I actually have found another possibly all-time favorite, and I'm talking about Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kazin. I have loved the movie of the same name for ages. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Perhaps for that reason, I'd not reached for the book immediately. Maybe I was scared of not liking it as much, and I actually was quite mind blown by it. I think the same stuff that I liked about the movie, I liked about this. So this really introspective look at mental health care back in the 60s. The personal interrogation of a woman, Susanna herself, who writes 25 years after the fact and wonders if she deserved to go there, if she benefited from going to this mental health facility and living there for about 2 years. She questions whether all the people around her also deserve to be there, considering everything that happened and how much it helped them. The book, however, has a completely different plot from the movie. Indeed, it doesn't have a plot. It's a totally non-fiction account. She is just bringing up some of the episodes and describing some of the patients at this facility. It's the same facility where, for example, Sylvia Plath went, and Ray Charles and other personalities. And it's quite interesting to see the self-awareness of Susanna as she recalls these times. She knows that she needed help. She was obviously sick. I found it very interesting, insightful, and thought-provoking in that way. And especially because of the fact that it is set in the 60s, I think it's 68. It also tells about a time in which things were completely different. So it's not so much a story about today's mental health care, but it very much is a relic of the past, which I think is so important because, of course, back in the day, treatment was so much different. So it's quite fascinating in that sense. I gave it 5 stars. And yeah, loved it. So that was my big recap for June. Those all 11 books that I read. I hope that you also had a very successful reading month, and let me know what your favorite books that you've read were down in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you want to see more like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!